Hi and welcome to Jessie James Beads. My name is Jem and spring is definitely in the air. Today I want to work with some spring boutique beauty. How about we look at blueberry patch? Sometimes you're feeling blue, sometimes you're feeling green. Let's head down to the board and take a closer look at this strand and then we'll make a project together. Blueberry patch from the Spring Boutique collection. Blues, greens and sultry opal tones in there. A gorgeous combination of metallics and lucite, I imagine, faux pearls, you've got spacers, you've got faceted rondelles in a couple of different colours. In a moment we'll unleash those beads and take a closer look, but I just wanted to do a little bit of a reveal for you. That's everything that I haven't used. And this is what we're going to make. So much movement in a design like this and lots of fun different ways that you can cascade these gorgeous leaves to your heart's content. In addition to the pieces that I'm drawing from the blueberry patch strand, which you can see here, I've got the beautifully colour graduated leaves. I've got 3 of the opal faceted rondelles, 3 of those colour coated sage green, 3 of the little white spacers, 3 of the filigree bead caps, a further colour coated sage, 1 of the large, I think it's lucite bead caps, and a further metallic bead cap as well. We'll be saving these blues for another project. I'm also going to be adding in some beading wire. You can use whatever wire you prefer. I'm going to be using black onyx from Soft Flex, the beading wire of the medium weight. And we're going to also be adding in 6 crimps, 6 crimp covers. So the first part of the tutorial today is a basic repeating section. What I'm going to do is show you this once and then you can just make each segment slightly longer than the preceding one. So you get this cascading look. So I'm going to grab a piece of that beading wire now. This is around about 3.5 to 4 inches in length, which is probably more than we need. Now when you're working with such beautiful beads as these, and it really is so much more than a bead, it's a bit lively today, you do want to take care with them. So for using beading wire instead of wire as we would normally know it, I'm just going to pop around about 1/2 inch through, fold it back on itself and just give that a quick squish. It won't hold, it's not wire. It's a beading wire, so it's a little bit more flexible. And then we're going to add in the first of our crimps. Now I prefer to use crimp tubes and I only squish them once. You may prefer to use a crimp plier and double crimp those. Now what we're looking for is for this to just be crimped. So if we slide that crimp tube down over the short end, you can adjust where that sits so that you're just crimping maybe the tiniest margin past. And all I'm going to do is give that a quick squish. Make sure that that's good and solid. If you have a lot of wire coming up and through on the end here, you can take a moment to just bend that away and give it a little trim. There's only a tiny tail, but just to show you, give that a trim away and you get a neat, perfect look. We're going to now give that a solid squish to make sure that that's good and safe. What I will then do is take one of my crimp covers, and because this is the face I wish to look at the front of the design, although these leaves are beautiful if they twist, they're gorgeous from both directions rather. What we're going to do is to put that bead crimp cover over the top so that the closing segment is on the rear of the design. Now you may have a different way of doing up your crimp covers. This is the way that I use. I just use standard chain nose pliers, but I do about 2 or 3 movements just to get that nice and smoothly set up. What I'm going to do now is add on the filigree bead cap all the way down over the top. It basically covers up the beautiful crimp cover that you've just put on. So if that doesn't face, if the seam doesn't face the right way, it doesn't really matter. And this is where you can play around with the design. You've got loads of beads left over, so you can use a different colour combination if you prefer. I was definitely feeling the greens when I made this piece. And I've gone for one of those colour-coated sage faceted rondelles. One of those, it's almost like a rubbery or a clayey texture spacer beads. And then one of those opaly coloured, colour-coated faceted rondelles. And what I'm going to do now is just allow that to sit for a moment and repeat a further 2 times to use up these other items. So I've repeated with the other 2 leaves and sequences of beads, and as I said, you could play around with your beads or your bead order if you prefer. What we're going to do now is start to connect these together. So if I just hold them in position, you can cascade them so that there's going from left to right, or you can just mix and jumble however that appeals to you. I'm just going to pinch that collection of strands of wire together, grab one of those crimp tubes or crimp beads if you prefer, start sliding it down and make sure that we get all 3 of those wires captured in that crimp bead. And then again, just check that the distances between each little collection are as you desire. And then I'm going to draw that down to a point that makes me happy. I think that's quite a nice arrangement so far. You could just adjust them slightly if you wanted them to be different. And what we're going to do is make sure that those 3 beading wires are side by side. They're not sat one on top of the other. And we're just going to crunch that together really securely to make sure that we're happy with how that looks. So we will pop a little bead crimp cover over the top here, and again just be mindful of the orientation. At this stage you won't be able to kind of flick that around if it doesn't go the right orientation for you. So I'm just holding that as best I can. Bring those 3 beading wires out of the way and close your crimp cover up in your preferred fashion. This is the way that I always do it. And then we're going to add another bead on. I think we will again go for one of these. I don't know if it's sage, I don't know if it's olive, I don't know what colour you'd call it. I think it's very attractive, whatever it is. We're going to pop all of those through that bead, allow that to sit down into position, and then we're going to add another crimp. And this is kind of belt and braces, just to make sure that things are nice and safe. So we've crimped that all together, so I'm less concerned about things falling off the desk now. I often get the shakes, and I just want to be sure that the least amount of damage happens if that occurs. So let's add another crimp, shall we? And slide that down over all 3 of those beading wires again, making sure that you capture all of them. And just give yourself a little bit of space between that bead and where you sit that crimp, so that you can get the bead cover or the crimp cover on successfully. Give that a quick squish. And before we do anything else, we're going to now cut away the 2 shorter wires. So whenever I'm using a beading thread, I will bend them away from the crimp after I've done the crimp. So you can see they're coming away at a funny angle. Just makes it slightly easier for me to ensure that I'm trimming very close to that crimp. And also I'm trimming the 2 wires that I wanted. I have no idea where they went. So let's add that crimp bead cover on. And it's probably going to go sideways at this juncture. Hold that into position, and these are really lovely beaded-on crimp covers. So they do have a nice smooth finish. Please do use your preferred method of crimping and adding crimp covers. Some people prefer to use crimping pliers. I prefer to use my straight faced bent chain nose pliers. So I've added a second crimp and reduced down up at the top here to a single beading thread. And at this point, I think it's quite nice to add a bead cap. So I'm going to go for the opal coloured lucite one again. And it can just sit much like a snowdrop over the top of the collection. I just think that adds a really lovely effect. You can see that my wires have gone a little bit awry. That's absolutely fine. Doesn't matter what orientation they sit in, but you can twist them if you need to. So what we're going to do now is add the last crimp on. And we're just going to create a very small loop up at the top. Now you may prefer to employ a tool to wrap your beading wire around, or you can do it freehand, so it's entirely up to you. I'm probably just going to go freehand. Bring that beading wire all the way back through. Make sure the crimp isn't too tight up against your bead cap. Allow that to come down and leave yourself a small loop at the top. You can, as I said, put one of those in if it helps you. I'm just going to go by freehand and just hold that firmly. Give yourself that little bit of space so you can get your crimp cover into position. Give that a firm squish. Draw the wire that you want to cut away sharply. And then you can trim that when you're ready. And we're going to add that last bead cap into position. Now this is the one that's always a little bit tricky to show because I've not got much to hold on to on the one side. So if this goes awry, don't worry, you don't have to do it in front of a camera. Let's just hold that in position and then just close that up around the crimp. You might like to use reverse action tweezers if you have them. That's the main part of the design, but what we're going to do is add just a little bit of wire up at the top. I have some 18 gauge round wire available, and I'm just going to give that a bit of a smooth and warm through, and we're just going to add a little bit more detail. There we go. So a little way away from one end, I'm going to turn that wire over and create a tiny little loop, like so, which we're going to add onto the design. Close that up by wrapping around the core wire. So trying to do this neatly is always helpful. You can add a little bit more tension by using 2 sets of pliers, and I'll show you that now. So if I grab some chain nose pliers and just support across that loop without pressing down on my beading wire, it gives me an opportunity just to tighten this up slightly so that we get a neater coil. If you make a bit of a mess of it, don't worry, because we're going to pop the bead cap of your choice over the top. Now in my demonstration piece, I added another one of those lucite, almost a snowdrop bead caps, but what you can do is mix and match and choose whatever makes you happy. So let's just spin that around to make it nice and neat and tidy. You can compress that spiral if you need to, and then we're going to add on this beautiful silver colourway bead cap. I didn't actually try it on the wire, we might have to use the other one. No, it does fit. Happy days. Draw that down over the top of the coil you've just made. You can close that up a little bit if you want to, and that's quite pretty. And then we're just going to go for a wrapped loop up at the top to create our bail. So let's push that forwards. I'm going to use my 6-step bail makers. Probably go for loop number 5. Draw that all the way around. It was far more wire than I needed. You really only need a couple of inches maximum, maybe about 3 or 4 inches if you have some scrap. And then we're going to draw that wire around. Now it's going to bonk on the table because it is so very much longer than I needed it to be. Let's pop that dish out of the way. Draw the wire all the way around until you've created a nice little tidy cascade of wires turning around, and then you can add a loop over the front if you wish to. So let's just sight that properly, decide what is the front. I think this will be the front. No, that will be the front. There we go. And then we'll trim to about 2 inches and add a spiral which you can sit upwards or downwards on the face of your bail design. So let's give that a squish. Nice little squeeze, and then we'll grab some round facing pliers. You could use the smallest pin. You could use your round nose pliers, you could use your memory wire pliers, or indeed your 6-step bail makers. So you've got that round form going now. And then push that all the way down so that it sits hard up against that bead cap, whichever one you chose to use. Let's sit that down for a second, see what orientation looks best. I think I'll properly close that little bead cap up. Push that so that it's centralised over the front of your bail. You might like to do that by hand, and then you can sit that upwards against the surface of the bail, or you can sit it downwards over the top of your bead cap. So let's bring the other one into view as well. And whichever way your leaves cascade down, they're going to look utterly beautiful. What a gorgeous design from Blueberry Patch.